Welcome back to the channel. This video is looking at environmental science and water pollution, and in particular we're looking at certain legislation that was passed in 1972 which paved the way for higher quality standards of water quality around the United States, looking at various pollutants, discharge, point and non-point pollution, and cleaning up the nation's water. This is the Earth Science Classroom. Water and water pollution are very big topics within environmental science, as like air and air pollution. Now, water pollution, just like air, can be polluted from various pollutants with various concentrations over different timescales, locations, and sources of both commercial, municipal, industrial, and personal sources of pollutants. The daily need for clean water is kind of obvious from a human perspective, as in we need it every day to hydrate, and we use it in all different industries and parts of our society. However, pollution is a byproduct, a side effect, and the analysis of this pollution is essential for water quality and standards. Over recent decades, various types of legislation, both in state, region, and federal government, have allowed certain agencies, especially the EPA, to take control of water quality and raise standards and improve the general understanding and awareness of pollution and what the pollutants are that are affecting our water source. Such legislation covering water quality and pollution in water is listed here. Now, it dates back to the 19th century, to 1899, where the first ever legislation pertaining to water quality was put in place by America, and this was the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899. Then there was a 50-year gap until 1948, when the federal government put in the Water Pollution Control Act, which was a more comprehensive oversight of water quality in the United States. Then it was followed a little shortly in 1965 by the Water Quality Act, again looking at quality of water, standards of water, and what's in the water and what pertains to clean water. And obvious industrial pollutants were identified and discussed in this legislation. Then there was the Refuse Act of 1970 and 1971. This is a short-lived legislation that covered industrial pollution and waste dumping into water sources, and it was quickly replaced by our main focus, the Comprehensive Clean Water Act, or CWA, of 1972. This was a very large, all-encompassing legislation by the federal government of America, which was an expanded version of the 1948. And it happened or occurred 2 years after the formation of the EPA back in early 1970. And the EPA took over the control, and the Clean Water Act allowed the EPA to do its job and really start to investigate and get their teeth into, so to speak, this water quality standards around the country. So the Clean Water Act was this expanded, comprehensive legislation by the federal government of the United States. Its sole purpose was to develop a much higher level and stricter standards on water quality, including bodies of water for both wildlife and habitats and the food chains, food webs, and the understanding and appreciation of ecology and the effect it has on the physical environment, and also the nutrient cycling of that area, plus the recreational areas for people, both in rivers and lakes, ponds, and the coastal areas. Then there were additional add-ons for this legislation, which included the certain pollutant discharges that were very harmful to the environment, especially water, and that the EPA was allowed to come into areas of the country and oversee and take control of these cleanup areas and be able to control and oversee the whole process, allowing for much stricter water quality standards to be addressed and adhered to around the country. Then there was the control of both point source pollution and non-point pollution. Now, point source is the direct injection of a pollutant of any type into a water source. So you know where it's coming from, you can track down and work backwards and find out what's causing the pollutants, what type of industry, factory, whatever. You can see it and you have a better handle on the situation. Whereas non-point source pollution is where the pollution is dissolved or moved away from the original source and you're not aware of where it comes from. You're not aware of what the original pollutants were before any chemical changes within the water, if any, and the concentrations and the time that it has spent in the water and how long it's been there to affect the environment. So non-point pollution is extremely difficult, and this legislation was there to crack down and become more aware of these non-point pollution areas around the country. So since 1972, since the inception of the CWA, or the Clean Water Act, there have been various amendments between 72 and the most recent 2021. Now the first one was in 1977, which looked at focusing on industrial pollution and stricter laws on pollutants and what factories can do and industries can do and dump into any water source. Then looked at in 81, general higher quality of water standards, which included constructive grants for townships to allow for better quality of water through infrastructure and construction, and more money to use to raise quality of water. Then in 87 you had stormwater discharges, which was basically looking at, again, urbanized areas and the water running off streets and pavements and sidewalks and highways and roads, and how that water is going into the stormwater, into the drains, and eventually finding its way into the rivers without any kind of treatment or analysis of possible pollutants. Then in 1990 we had a large addition of the Great Lakes, the Critical Programs Act between both the US and Canada, looking at reducing toxic pollution in the Great Lakes, especially around the industrialized areas. Then in 94 we had sewer overflow control, which again, analysis or IDing that sewers are a large area of contamination and pollutants, and trying to reduce or remove any overflow of those systems, which would cause obvious pollution issues. Then in 2000, we had the Beaches and Coastal Health Act, which is actually called the Beach Act, which is awesome acronym. And this looked at, obviously, the coastal areas where people recreation and enjoy, and reducing any issues with pollution in those areas around both the East Coast and the West Coast and the Gulf of Mexico. Then in 2006, you had a general amendment looking at all sources of water, including both rivers, streams, wetlands, lakes, marshes, and obviously, again, coastlines. Again, to study and survey what's going on in these areas, more of a countrywide analysis. Then in 2021, the last one currently, Congress and the federal government allocated billions of dollars to producing new infrastructure to, again, raise the quality of water, create less pollution issues, and contamination would be reduced, discharges would be analyzed, and allowing for more growth of just a better overall system to control water and allow for better standards of water around the country. In conclusion, the Clean Water Act of 1972 was a comprehensive federal legislation covering a lot more about water quality than previously done, and the EPA was able to go around the country and enforce much stricter laws on both pollutants, discharges, point and non-point pollution, water quality of different water sources for both wildlife and recreation, and generally allow for improved and increased water quality around the United States of America, of which has been benefited ever since. Thank you so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like it, please subscribe and maybe hit the like button. If you like more on this content, please check out my channel, which has all these videos on earth science.